The movie begins on what appears to be a perfectly serene, beautiful day deep within the untamed wilderness. Two cheerful hikers are trekking through the dense sunlit forest. One holds a GPS device to navigate the winding trails, while the other holds a camera, happily snapping photographs of the breathtaking natural scenery. They chat casually, completely unaware that they have wandered into a nightmare. Without a single warning, the deafening crack of a gunshot echoes through the trees. A high-caliber sniper bullet rips straight through the camera lens, striking the photographer directly in the head. He collapses instantly, dead before he hits the dirt. Paralyzed by sheer terror, the second hiker drops the GPS device and sprints blindly into the dense woods, running for his life. Back at the site of the shooting, a cold, calculated killer steps out from the camouflage of the trees. He slowly approaches the dying hiker who was shot. In a twisted, dark ritual, the killer kneels beside his victim, whispering a quiet prayer for his final journey into the afterlife. As soon as the prayer ends, he ruthlessly finishes the hiker off with a sharp hunting blade. Meanwhile, another member of this deranged hunting party easily chases down the fleeing hiker and brutally murders him in the brush. The tone is set. These woods are a slaughterhouse. Following this horrific display of violence, the story shifts to a young woman named Catherine, who goes by the nickname Kat. Kat is currently living her own personal nightmare. Desperate to escape the clutches of her violently abusive boyfriend, she decides to disappear off the grid by joining a wilderness expedition group. Her caring brother drives her to the drop-off point. He gives her a heavy backpack filled with essential supplies, offers her a few final words of protective advice, and wishes her luck before driving away. Gathering her courage, Kat hikes alone toward the expedition base camp. Upon arriving, she meets Jean, the tough, no-nonsense leader and coordinator of the wilderness retreat. Jean is incredibly strict, intensely focused on the schedule, and surprisingly unwelcoming. After briefly questioning Kat's reasons for joining the trip, Jean briskly walks her through the camp to introduce her to the rest of the all-female group. First, Kat is introduced to Shay. Then, she meets April and Madison, who are already bickering and fighting over the kitchen duties and supplies. Next, Jean leads Kat to Ren, a highly erratic, strange girl who seems completely detached from reality. Jean immediately reprimands Ren for breaking the strict camp rules by bringing a knife, firmly ordering her not to take it on the trail. Finally, Jean attempts to introduce Kat to Joy, a disciplined former soldier. However, Joy interrupts the introduction, pulling Jean aside into a private room to furiously complain that Ren had been rummaging through her personal belongings, wanting to keep the peace. Jean quickly finishes the introductions and announces that the entire group has exactly 5 minutes to freshen up and pack their gear before the journey begins. The women scramble to get ready. In the privacy of the bathroom, Kat splashes cold water on her face. As she adjusts her shirt, she looks in the mirror, revealing deep, dark, painful bruises wrapped around her ribs, the lingering physical evidence of her abusive boyfriend. Taking a deep breath, she covers the bruises and joins the group. The women pile into a transport van. As they drive toward the starting point of the hiking trail, Kat quietly writes her thoughts down in a personal journal. When the van finally stops at the edge of the deep forest, Jean gathers the women and delivers a strong motivational speech to prepare them for the grueling physical journey ahead. The van drivers say goodbye, promising to drive around the mountain and meet them at the final extraction point. The women march into the dense, silent woods. They are completely cut off from the modern world. No campfires allowed, no Wi-Fi, no cell phone service, and absolutely no other people for miles. Early into the hike, the erratic Ren sneaks away to swallow a handful of illicit drugs she smuggled in. Meanwhile, the former soldier Joy is scanning the environment. Near the base of a large tree, she spots an abandoned bullet casing. She picks it up, showing it to Ren, and explaining the specific caliber of the ammunition. Despite this glaring red flag, the group treats it like a normal piece of forest debris. They even walk right past a prominent warning sign planted in the dirt, completely oblivious to the terrifying danger silently waiting for them. While the women hike, the van driver is making his way toward the final destination. Suddenly, he is forced to hit the brakes. A strange car is parked horizontally, completely blocking the narrow dirt road. The driver steps out of his van, calling out to see if anyone needs help. Hearing no response, he leans forward to peer into the empty cabin of the blocking vehicle. Without warning, a man steps out from the blind spot behind him, wraps a thick garrote wire around the driver's neck, and violently strangles him to death. This brutal killer is part of a highly organized group of psychotic murderers led by a man named Ted. His twisted followers include the Strangler Zeke, who is also their elite sniper, along with Zeb and Wilson. They are not hunting animals. They actively hunt human beings for sport, completely unaware that their driver is dead and a hunting party is tracking them. Gene's group sets up their tents as night falls. They sit together, sharing personal stories, bonding, peacefully resting under the stars. The next morning, Ted's psychotic hunting party prepares for their deadly game. Following their twisted traditions, they gather to pray before the hunt. They then release their ultimate tracking tool, a deranged feral man they treat like a bloodhound, commonly referred to as the human dog, with their beast unleashed. The killers march into the forest. Meanwhile, the women continue their carefree hike. They stumble upon an old, abandoned cabin hidden deep in the trees, but decide not to explore it, pushing forward. As they attempt to cross a steep, rocky ravine, disaster strikes. Gene loses her footing on the loose dirt, slipping and tumbling hard down the steep incline. She screams in agony as her arm is violently dislocated from its socket. Kat, relying on her past training as a paramedic, immediately steps up. She skillfully pops Gene's arm back into place and secures it tightly with a makeshift sling. Because their leader is severely injured, the group is forced to halt their progress. They set up a temporary camp near an old, rotting warehouse to let Gene rest. As the women try to relax, Kat approaches the drug-addicted Ren, having noticed her erratic behavior. Kat quietly asks Ren for a pill, only to discover how incredibly strong the drugs are. Out of genuine concern, Kat urges Ren to quit. But Ren brushes her off and walks away, needing to relieve herself. Joy separates from the group and walks alone into the dense brush. As she finishes, she spots something horrifying on the ground. The GPS device from the murdered hiker at the beginning of the movie. It is covered in dried blood, and the battery is completely dead. Suddenly, she hears a rustling in the bushes. Joy turns and tries to sprint away, but the feral human dog leaps from the shadows, tackling her to the dirt. Relying on her military training, Joy fiercely fights back, throwing punches and trying to gain the upper hand. But the feral man's raw, animalistic strength is too much. He pins her down and, using his bare hands, brutally rips her throat open. As Joy bleeds to death, the human dog snatches her military dog tags as a grotesque trophy. The rest of the hunting party silently surrounds the women's camp. Positioning himself perfectly, Zeke looks through the scope of his high-powered sniper rifle. He targets the injured leader. A gunshot shatters the silence, and Gene is struck instantly. Pure, unadulterated chaos erupts. The deafening sound of gunfire echoes from the trees as the terrified women scramble in all directions. In the sheer panic to survive, they abandon the dying Gene and sprint blindly into the woods, satisfied with his sniper fire. One of the hunters moves in on foot. One of the killers, entirely unable to control his bloodlust, breaks formation and chases after Madison, tackling her to the ground and preparing to kill her. But before he can strike, Shay charges forward with a massive, heavy rock, bringing it down squarely on the killer's skull, crushing his head and saving Madison. The women pull each other up and continue running for their lives. Back at the camp, Ted and his men casually stroll up to the bleeding, dying Gene. Ted coldly asks her exactly how many women are in her group. Even with her dying breaths, Gene fiercely refuses to give them any information. Frustrated, Ted executes her on the spot. The surviving women sprint until they are trapped near the edge of a massive steep cliff. Hearing the relentless gunfire getting closer, they are forced to change direction. Ted, realizing the prey is fleeing, hands a sharp knife to his human dog, ordering the beast to hunt them down without mercy. Ted pauses only to pray over the body of his fallen team member before the group resumes the chase. desperate to escape. The women attempt to scale a steep, treacherous rock wall leading up the mountain. Ren is climbing near the top, but in her frantic haste, she slips. Her foot violently dislodges a massive, heavy boulder. The rock plummets downward, crashing directly onto Shay's head. Shay falls instantly, killed by the horrific accident. Realizing the mountain path is too dangerous and slow, the devastated group is forced to climb back down. They abandon Shay's broken body and retreat deeper into the forest trails. Night falls, and the exhausted, traumatized survivors huddle together in the dark. As the sun rises the next morning, they desperately hold up their phones, praying for even a single bar of cell service. But there is nothing. The tension snaps when Madison suddenly spots one of the killers lurking in the trees. Blinded by fear, she doesn't warn the others. She simply turns and sprints away on her own. The killer immediately gives chase, separating Madison from the group and cornering her at the edge of a deep cliff. As the killer raises his weapon to slaughter Madison, April bursts through the bushes, bravely charging the man from behind. A violent struggle ensues, and the killer drives his hunting knife deep into April's stomach. Hearing the screams, the rest of the women finally arrive. Screaming in rage, they swarm the killer. Using heavy tree branches and pure adrenaline, they mercilessly beat the man until he staggers backward, slipping off the edge of the cliff and tumbling like a rag doll into the rocky abyss below. The immediate threat is gone. But April is bleeding out rapidly. The women frantically apply pressure to her severe stab wound, remembering the abandoned cabin they passed the day before. They carry the bleeding April through the woods, hoping to find shelter and supplies. They kick the cabin door open. Kat quickly clears the surrounding area, checking for threats. Finding it empty, they lay April down in the main living room, desperately trying to stop the bleeding. Knowing they need bandages and antiseptics immediately, Kat runs into an adjacent room to search for medical supplies, but April has lost too much blood. Before Kat can return, April takes her final breath and dies on the cabin floor. Meanwhile, inside the adjacent room, Kat's blood runs cold. Searching through the drawers, she uncovers horrific trophies and weapons. She realizes with absolute terror that they haven't found a safe haven, they have just walked directly into the killer's home base. She turns to flee, but a killer is already waiting for her at the door. He lunges, wrapping his heavy hands tightly around her throat, choking the life out of her. But Kat refuses to be a victim again. Remembering the abuse she survived, she channels her rage, aggressively gouging the killer's eyes with her thumbs. As he recoils, Kat grabs a heavy iron pipe from the floor. With relentless, brutal force, she beats the killer to death, striking him over and over again until he stops moving, covered in blood. Kat escapes the cabin and hides in the dense brush. Nearby, she hears voices. She creeps closer and overhears Ted and his men. They don't yet know their cabin was breached or their men are dead. Ted is actively planning to wipe out the remaining women. He turns to his junior member Zeb and gives a chilling order. Zeb is allowed to keep one of the women alive for himself. Zeb grins and heads out into the woods to hunt. Back at the cabin, Ren and Madison realize April is dead and Kat is missing. Knowing the killers are coming, Ren hands Madison a sharp hunting knife, grabs one from the kitchen sink for herself, and prepares to fight to the death. Kat sprints back to warn her friends. Inside, a heavy knock echoes on the front door. Ren, gripping her blade, bravely steps outside to confront the threat. But the door opens to an empty porch. Suddenly, a gunshot rings out from the tree line. The bullet tears through Ren, and she collapses. Kat arrives just in time, grabbing Ren by the collar and dragging her bleeding body back inside the cabin. Outside, the killer, who was pushed off the cliff, reveals he survived the fall. He charges toward the cabin and violently attacks Madison on the porch. A desperate fight for survival breaks out. But Madison manages to use the knife Ren gave her, ruthlessly stabbing the killer and ending his life. Inside the cabin, the true nightmare begins. Ted, the sadistic leader, kicks the door open, leveling his deadly, double-barreled shotgun. Just as he prepares to execute Kat, Madison sneaks up from behind. With a scream, she drives her hunting knife deep into Ted's back. Howling in pain, Ted staggers forward and escapes out the door, fleeing blindly into the woods. Kat, determined to end this once and for all, grabs a weapon and chases Ted into the trees, while Madison frantically searches for medical supplies to save the bleeding Ren. As Ren lies helpless on the floor, the junior killer Zeb enters the room. Believing he has found his prize, he stands over the wounded girl, disgustingly asking if she is a virgin. Ren pretends to be weak, waiting for the perfect opening. In a flash of defiance, she thrusts her blade directly into Zeb's neck, instantly executing him deep in the woods. Kat tracks down the wounded Ted. She sneaks up behind him and violently yanks the hunting knife out of his back, intending to use it against him. But Ted is a highly skilled fighter. He dodges her lethal strike and aggressively fights back. Kat slashes at him, but Ted overpowers her, knocking her to the ground. Standing over her, bleeding but victorious, Ted raises his gun to deliver the final shot. Refusing to die, Kat summons every last ounce of her strength. She lunges upward, closing the distance, and uses her bare hands and a heavy rock to viciously smash Ted across the skull. As he drops the weapon in a daze, Kat snatches his gun from the dirt, aims it directly at his head, and pulls the trigger. Blowing his brains out, the forest falls dead silent. The psychotic hunting party has been completely eradicated. Covered in dirt, sweat, and blood, Kat walks back to the cabin. She reunites with a heavily bandaged Ren and an exhausted Madison. The three traumatized but victorious survivors lean on each other for support. Together, they slowly walk away from the cabin, marching down the long, empty dirt road towards civilization and safety. Having survived the ultimate test of human endurance? Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the recaps, pause, like, and subscribe. See you in next recap.